In popular imagination, medieval battlefields are often ruled by knights in shining armor, charging on horseback, locked in heroic duels, and deciding the outcome of wars with sword and shield. But that image leaves out a critical reality. The real force that shaped many battles, broke enemy formations, and challenged the very structure of medieval warfare wasn't a knight at all. It was the archer. With long-range precision, coordinated firepower, and unmatched flexibility, archers redefined how wars were fought. This wasn't just a shift in tactics, it was a complete transformation of battlefield logic. In this video, we're taking a closer look at why medieval archers were more dangerous, more effective, and ultimately more decisive than the knights who once dominated the field. Number 1, the power of range. One of the most defining advantages medieval archers had over knights was their ability to inflict damage long before close combat even began. Unlike heavily armored cavalry who relied on physical presence and proximity to engage the enemy, archers shaped the outcome of a battle from a distance. Their effectiveness came not only from the range of their weapons, but also from the volume and precision of their firepower. Well-trained archers using powerful longbows could accurately shoot at targets from more than 200 yards away, and they didn't just fire occasionally, many were capable of launching 10 or more arrows per minute in steady volleys. That meant dozens of projectiles could be in the air at any given moment, constantly pressuring the opposing forces without ever making direct contact. This constant stream of arrows had both a physical and psychological impact. Physically, it meant that knights, regardless of their armor, were under constant threat. Although plate armor offered some protection, it wasn't invulnerable. The design of the longbow and the specific types of arrowheads used were meant to exploit weak points in armor, such as gaps under the arms, necklines, or visors. When hundreds of archers released volleys simultaneously, the sheer number of arrows increased the likelihood of hitting those vulnerable areas. Many horses, which were crucial for mounted knights, were also highly exposed. Injured or killed horses often led to dismounted knights who became slower, easier targets. Beyond the physical damage, there was a clear psychological toll. Soldiers marching into a barrage of arrows had to deal with the sound of projectiles slicing through the air, the cries of wounded men and animals, and the sight of comrades collapsing nearby before even getting the chance to fight. The fear of being struck without warning or without the ability to defend oneself led to panic, hesitation, and disorganization. Units that broke formation in response to these barrages often lost cohesion, making them easier to defeat by the time close combat occurred. In many cases, the power of ranged attacks could determine the battle's outcome before traditional melee tactics ever came into play. Archers controlled time and space on the battlefield in a way that knights simply could not. Their arrows didn't just weaken the enemy physically, they disrupted entire strategies, forcing commanders to react and adapt under pressure. In medieval warfare, that ability to disrupt and damage from a distance often proved more decisive than any sword charge, and it made archers a central force in military planning. Number 2, logistics and cost. In the structure of medieval warfare, the difference in cost and logistical complexity between knights and archers was significant, and this gap directly influenced military decisions, battlefield composition, and long-term campaign planning. A single knight represented a substantial financial burden. Equipping one required a strong, trained warhorse, a full suit of armor, a variety of weapons, such as a lance, sword, and dagger, and often additional support, including a squire or servant to help manage equipment, assist in battle preparation, and care for the horse and armor. Beyond that, knights came from a specific social class, and their participation in warfare was often tied to their status, obligations, and the politics of feudal service. In short, knights were not just fighters, they were elite assets, and losing one was both a material and social blow to the army. Archers, by contrast, represented a far more economical option. They typically came from lower classes and required fewer resources to outfit and maintain. Most wore only minimal armor, often just a leather jerkin or simple padded protection, which allowed for easier movement and reduced cost. Their primary weapon, a longbow or similar type of bow, was relatively simple to produce compared to the intricate forging of plate armor or chainmail. Ammunition could be manufactured in bulk, and even secondary weapons like short swords or daggers were inexpensive by comparison. This simplicity allowed armies to mobilize large groups of archers in a short time and at a fraction of the cost. The practical outcome of this was that commanders looking to assemble effective forces for prolonged campaigns had to think in terms of scale and sustainability. It was far more feasible to train and field dozens or even hundreds of archers than to rely on a smaller number of knights. Archers could be housed more easily, fed with less difficulty, and moved in greater numbers without the strain that accompanied transporting a mounted force. This also allowed greater flexibility in deployment. Archers could defend walls, support infantry, or be stationed across wider areas of terrain without compromising the overall strategy. Furthermore, while a knight required years of training and specialized upbringing, an archer could be trained with discipline and practice, often starting from youth but without the same class restrictions. Their effectiveness wasn't tied to noble birth, but to consistency, accuracy, and endurance. This made them not only cheaper but also more accessible, allowing armies to rebuild and reinforce quickly. In long wars where losses were inevitable, this mattered. A military force built on archers could absorb casualties and still remain functional, while a force centered around expensive knights risked being crippled by even moderate losses. Number 3. Flexibility and terrain use. One of the major distinctions between mounted knights and archers in medieval warfare was how each responded to the terrain and physical conditions of the battlefield. Knights, by the nature of their role and equipment, were most effective in open, flat areas where they could charge at full speed, coordinate maneuvers in formation, and take advantage of their size and armor. This type of fighting demanded space, visibility, and a solid surface, because even a well-trained cavalry unit could quickly lose its effectiveness if the ground was uneven, narrow, or obstructed. Mud, steep slopes, forests, or rocky hills made traditional night tactics difficult, and in some cases impossible to execute properly. Archers, in contrast, were not dependent on specific battlefield conditions to remain effective. Their value came from their ability to use any terrain to their advantage. Whether fighting in dense woodlands, along ridgelines, from behind city walls, or across muddy fields, they remained combat-ready and could be deployed quickly with little logistical adjustment. In wooded areas, archers could hide in cover and ambush advancing enemies before they even understood the source of the attack. In hilly terrain, they positioned themselves at higher elevations, gaining range and visibility while remaining harder to reach by foot or horse. In defensive scenarios, they operated behind walls or fortifications, raining down arrows while being protected by the structures around them. Another key advantage was their ability to rapidly relocate during combat. Archers, lightly equipped and unburdened by heavy armor or horses, could shift positions on command, change firing angles, or retreat and regroup without disrupting the flow of the overall force. If the situation demanded it, they could transition from direct attack to support roles, helping infantry hold lines or respond to enemy flanking movements. They were capable of setting up defensive obstacles as well. Simple wooden stakes planted in front of archer lines created effective barriers against cavalry, making sudden charges far less effective or even disastrous. The freedom to adapt tactics during the course of a battle gave archers an edge and versatility that knights did not possess. Knights followed a more rigid structure, often committed to a charge or direct assault with limited ability to react once momentum had started. Archers, on the other hand, contributed not just through their firepower, but through their consistent ability to adjust, reposition, and operate under changing battlefield conditions. In practice, this meant they could remain useful across many more scenarios and terrains, shaping the rhythm of combat instead of simply responding to it. Number 4. The science of death. The warbow used by medieval archers was not a simple tool. It was the result of precise craftsmanship, practical knowledge, and a deep understanding of how to deliver lethal force across distance. Typically made from strong yet flexible wood such as yew, elm, or ash, the construction of a longbow involved selecting a stave with the right balance of elasticity and strength, shaping it carefully over time, and understanding how the grain of the wood would affect tension when drawn. When a bow was properly made, it stored a remarkable amount of energy. That stored power was released instantly when the string was loosed, sending an arrow forward at speeds high enough to pierce armor, flesh, and bone. Arrows were not randomly made either. Different types of arrowheads served specific purposes depending on the enemy and their armor. Bodkin points, narrow and sharply tapered, were designed to punch through mail or slide into the gaps of plate defenses. Barbed heads tore deep into soft tissue, causing maximum internal damage, and making the removal of the arrow nearly impossible without worsening the wound. Archers knew where to aim. In real combat, they didn't just fire blindly, they targeted specific weak points on the human body and the horse. Gaps in plate armor at the armpits, neck, groin, or behind the knees were common targets. The eyes and face, partially exposed through visors, were also at risk, especially during closer engagements. What made these archers so effective was not only the power of their weapons or the sharpness of their arrows, but the organization behind their fire. Archery units didn't act independently but followed strict commands. When the trained archers fired in volleys, often timed with drums, whistles, or visual signals, the result was not sporadic or chaotic. It was highly synchronized. Hundreds of arrows would be in the air at once, covering a wide area and saturating enemy ranks before they had time to react or reorganize. This tactic turned open fields into deadly zones where movement alone could mean exposure and death. The presence of such calculated, repeated barrages altered how battles were approached. Armor became less of a protection and more of a false sense of security. Knights and mounted troops, though highly respected, were not immune to a weapon system that combined physical force with tactical coordination. This balance between practical materials, tactical training, and an understanding of human vulnerability created an efficient killing system. The war bow in the hands of a trained archer was not simply a ranged weapon. It was a battlefield equalizer capable of breaking elite formations and reshaping combat dynamics through sheer effectiveness. Number 5. Strategy over glory. In the traditional view of medieval warfare, the knight was often portrayed as the centerpiece of battle, a symbol of courage, status, and chivalric ideals. This image, though powerful in literature and legend, did not fully represent the realities of military success during the later medieval period. Battles were not won by personal bravery or isolated duels between elite warriors. They were won through preparation, coordination, and the calculated use of forces across the field. Archers played a central role in this transformation, moving warfare away from individual displays of valor and toward a system grounded in tactics and collective action. Unlike knights who were often motivated by personal reputation and the desire for honor, archers operated as part of a larger mechanism. Their training focused less on personal combat and more on unit cohesion, discipline, and timing. Archers learned to follow commands precisely, to fire in volleys rather than at will, and to function as one synchronized unit capable of overwhelming enemy lines before close combat even started. This emphasis on control and repetition made them far more reliable in shaping the outcome of a battle than any single warrior, regardless of his armor or status. The strength of archery units wasn't simply in their ability to inflict casualties, but in how they shaped the flow of engagements. A well-positioned line of archers could dictate the enemy's movements by denying access to key terrain, disrupting formations, or forcing a commander to commit troops earlier than planned. Their constant pressure made it difficult for the opposing force to execute complex maneuvers, and once confusion took hold, an army's entire structure could unravel. This strategic use of ranged force often laid the groundwork for victory before swords were drawn. In siege warfare, their utility was even greater. Archers could hold walls for extended periods, repel scaling attempts, and target engineers working to breach fortifications. On the offensive, they suppressed defenders and created safe zones for sappers and infantry to approach. Their presence extended the reach of any commander and made battles less about who fought hardest and more about who used their forces most effectively. As military thinking developed, reliance on the traditional knightly class declined. The realities of battlefield control, logistics, and coordination demanded a new type of soldier, one that fit into a larger strategic vision. Archers became not only a part of that shift, but one of the main forces driving it forward. Number 6. Cultural and tactical shift. The widespread use of archers in medieval warfare represented more than just a change in battlefield tactics. It marked a significant cultural and structural transformation within military systems and society itself. Traditionally, warfare had been dominated by the upper classes, particularly the nobility, who alone could afford the equipment, training, and horses required to serve as knights. Combat was often seen as the rightful responsibility of the elite, both a duty and a privilege, closely tied to land ownership and social status. However, as the importance of ranged warfare grew and archers became a central part of military planning, the foundations of this old warrior hierarchy began to shift in visible and lasting ways. The inclusion of commoners as trained, organized combatants challenged long-standing assumptions about who held value on the battlefield. Archers, often recruited from rural populations, proved that military effectiveness no longer depended solely on heavy armor or mounted charges. With proper training and discipline, these individuals could hold their own and, in many cases, decisively influence the outcome of battles. This was not merely a symbolic development. It had a practical impact on the way armies were raised, structured, and maintained. Commanders increasingly prioritized results over titles, understanding that disciplined archers offered a level of tactical flexibility, reach, and sustained pressure that mounted nobles simply could not match on their own. This shift also altered the way military strength was measured. Instead of relying on a relatively small number of elite fighters, kingdoms began focusing on building larger, more balanced forces, where coordination and massed firepower played a leading role. Strategic thinking expanded beyond personal valor to include factors such as terrain usage, formation control, and sustained long-range engagement. The presence of archers enabled armies to dominate space, delay enemy advances, and apply pressure from a safe distance, all of which contributed to a new model of warfare built on planning and structure rather than tradition and ceremony. On a deeper level, this development reflected broader changes in society. Warfare was no longer reserved for the few. The battlefield became a space where class distinctions blurred, at least temporarily under the demands of military necessity. The longbow in the hands of a trained peasant could kill a mounted noble just as effectively as any sword, turning social status into a secondary concern in the face of military utility. Over time, this redefinition of value on the battlefield helped lay the groundwork for more professional armies and shifted the nature of warfare away from personal glory toward organized collective effectiveness. Archers didn't just change how battles were fought, they changed who had the right to fight them.